Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Debbie Schwartz, founder of Road to College and paying for College 101 Facebook group, and I'm here with Brad Schiller. He's the CEO of Prompt, and I'm just going to give people a few more minutes to come on in, and I'm going to spotlight me and Brad too, in case you don't want to. Okay, there we go. And so I don't know if any of you guys have been following us. We've been doing these sessions like once a month since June. This is it. This is the last one. It's been fun, Brad, but it has to end.
Well, till like June again.
Right.
If that's what you mean, we're going to be hanging again next June. So,
yeah.
Sure.
But I'd be curious, people who are on here tonight, let us know. I'd be curious if your student sent in anything, if they applied early. If they did, it's perfectly fine. Just kind of curious if anybody is waiting for early admissions decisions, or they didn't do that phase of the process and their student is applying regular. Perfectly fine. It's just kind of a curiosity to kind of understand.
Yeah, and then like, where are you at in the essay process? So if you have, if you've applied early, are you excited, happy about your essay? Maybe you've heard back already, early decision or early action, or maybe you're just like heading into the holidays and know that there's a lot of work ahead.
Right.
Before the deadlines.
So share and let us know. And as you probably saw when you registered, people had the chance to send in their essays, and we're going to randomly pick. I feel like we should have one of those like balls, with like the lotto balls. But
yeah, I could use I could go in Excel and create a random number generator if we really want to, but I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, so we're going to pick one, maybe two. We'll see what the timing is like, and we will we'll critique them, and you guys will help critique them, because it's kind of like it's a fun lesson in how to look at the essays. But let's see. So I have somebody who just sent me a direct message. Maybe that was by mistake, but I'll just say that she said that she has a junior, which I love seeing when people are here and they actually have juniors, because it's the perfect thing to come watch and learn about, because it sets you and your student up to understand where you need to be next year, and kind of even how much you've still got time between now and next year. So kudos to you for being here. And Marie says her daughter's still working on essays, and Colin says, I hope to finish up in 2 weeks. I hope you're finishing up in 2 weeks too, because that's the deadline. Or you might have it June 15th. So sorry, January 15th. So you might have a little bit more time.
Yep. All right. And there's some February 1st out there, some March. There's many colleges have applications that go much later than this, but a lot of the schools that actually have essays and supplemental essays typically have deadlines in the early January, or by February 1st is pretty common, is what we see. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to go ahead and get started today. And I know Debbie will jump in a bunch of times with questions that you all may have as you're kind of going through this. Please drop those in the chat. My name is Brad Schiller. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Prompt. What we do is make people better writers. One of the things that we do is college admissions essays, and we provide feedback on more college admissions essays than anybody else in the world, by a lot, actually. And we coach thousands and thousands of students a year on their essays. So what we're going to talk about today is based off of the result of working with many thousands of students. We have great success working with students. So roughly speaking, 3 in 4 students that we work with get into one or more of their reach colleges. So that's not like the what you would put on your list as like some people do, like reach, target, safety. I hate the nomenclature personally, but let's go for that because that's somewhat common. And we're talking about like the reach schools is where we have a lot of success there. And we can talk a little bit more about that and like, how does that functionally work as we go through this. But essays really matter. They matter so much that as long as you are academically qualified for the institution you're applying to, which by the way is the vast majority of applicants, strong essays can have a 10x increase on your admissions chances. Okay. And as we'll see today, as we look at some of the examples, which I have not looked at any of the essays yet that I review, I always just review them live, just get my reactions kind of as we go, and how we would think about those essays. But this is really critical, is like most students do not have strong essays, like the vast majority. And it's one of the best ways to differentiate yourselves as students and applicants. And so what we talk about tonight will give you a lot of good tools for doing that. So what we're going to talk first about is like what should be included in the essays and that sort of thing. And some of you that may have attended some of these sessions or watched some of these, this will be like old hat content, but it's always good to hear it again and again and again. You know, some of the hundreds of high schools that we work with, like we're just giving workshops every single year, and we just have to like basically like beat this into people over and over and over again, because it really matters, is like, what does your audience actually really care about when you're writing? So that's what we're going to cover first. So that way, when we actually go through the examples of essays, we are going to pick out together what is compelling or not compelling about the essays based off of what the audience actually cares about. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. All right. Now we're going to go ahead and get started. So the number one thing related to admissions essays is that the entire purpose of the college application is to prove you'll be successful in college and beyond. Okay, so your student is really trying to prove that they're going to be successful if they get into that college, and they're going to be successful after they graduate. That means doing well in your classes, right? Getting good grades. Like that's a measurable thing that schools are tracking, and they actually look at, okay, this for the student populations that we have admitted, are they actually succeeding? Are they doing well in school? Are they graduating and graduating on time? Are they like contributing to the school's community in some positive way? Are they is this school having a strong and unique impact on that student such that that student's going to be more successful in life? These are the things that colleges are really trying to understand and decide as they're reading through the applications. Okay. And so with that, they're looking for very specific and targeted pieces of information, which we're going to talk about next. But why this is really important is that there is a big myth that unfortunately admissions officers also propagate, counselors propagate, everybody propagates this myth, but it is actually not correct, which is that the entire purpose of essays is that they're about storytelling. So telling your story. So we have an article, for example, that we've written that is basically a bunch of admissions officers that say, hey, we just want you to tell your story. Tell us your story. Hey, we just want to get to know you, etc. And then you have quotes from those same admissions officers that actually talk about how they evaluate applicants, and it is different. All right. So what we need to look at is like, what are the actions that they're actually taking? How are they actually evaluating the applicants? And how is that different than what they're actually telling students? All right. So basically this is not incorrect information. You are supposed to tell your story, but you want to tell your story in a way that proves you're going to be successful in college and beyond. And how you prove your success is based off of the experiences that you've had to date that are related to certain traits that are associated with future success. Okay. So it's just like if you're going through a job interview or your students eventually going through a job interview, like what are the traits? What are the things that the interviewer is actually looking for to determine whether or not you can do the job, right? And so that really comes down to these 5 things. The first, and I call these like the 5 traits, okay? And the first is drive. So these are students that no matter what situation they're put in, no matter how long the odds are, they're going to get through the situation. They're going to get through difficult situations and come out a better person. But they're not like passively sitting by and letting stuff happen to them. They're actively engaging in those moments such that they're going to take actions that actually lead to a better and more positive outcome. Okay. So those are really driven students. It could be a very challenging situation or a difficult family situation. It could be just like learning something new. It could be part of an organization. Drive can be a lot of different things, right? But schools love driven students because when they come across challenging situations while in school, guess what? They're just going to persevere through They're going to get through those. They're going to go on and graduate. They're going to go do great things, etc. Drive is really, really important. The second is intellectual curiosity. So these are students who love learning just for the fun of it, to get a deeper understanding of certain subjects or topics in which they're interested in. All right. Lots of students are intellectually curious. And you could be intellectually curious about anything. Some students are intellectually curious about cooking. Others are about like athletics and sports and other things like that, right? Others are around like Pokemon, which maybe that's not for me, but like, these are things that students get really, really excited about and learn super deeply about. And those are things that schools really love, is because intellectually curious students are going to major in something or go do something that they're really interested in. They're going to have careers and stuff that they're really interested in, most likely. And the more intellectually curious you are, the more successful you're going to be, right? So they love intellectually curious students, and students really a lot of times fail to identify or write about these things on in their essays. The third is initiative. So these are students that are really entrepreneurial. Often they're leaders in whatever groups that they're a part of, and they're not willing to accept the status quo, right? So they kind of are within an organization or a group of people. They find something that is it could be better, right? And not only they are identifying ways to make it better, but they are actively taking action to make it better. All right. Colleges love students that take the initiative, because when they're on campus, they're making the school's community better, right? They're contributing in significant and meaningful ways that will have lasting impacts into the future, right? And not only that, after they graduate, they're the ones that are going to go and like eventually become leaders within companies or found companies, or go, be leaders in nonprofits or governments or whatever it is. And if you happen to make a lot of money and you donate it back to the school, all the better. Okay. So they love students with initiative. The fourth is contribution. So these are students that no matter what group of people that they're a part of, that group is better as a result of their being there. Okay. This is really important. A lot of times, these are the students that are like the super connectors, like the connective tissue, if you will, across a wide range or community. And colleges love these students because when they bring them onto campus, part of the college's product, right, what they're selling is not just education. You can get education anywhere. I could go on YouTube and get education, right? Coursera, wherever. They're also selling community, right? And they're selling people making themselves like each other better. And so what you need is these like super contributors, these students that are making everybody around them better. That really matters to colleges, and they love identifying and bringing those types of students in. And then the fifth trait is diversity of experiences. So these are students that have different life experiences, different ways of thinking about the world. It could be different interests, it could be different backgrounds, it could be all sorts of different things. And these add unique perspectives to the student body. And once again, when you're thinking about a school's community, they want each students to learn from each other, right? They want them to start learning about the world and like develop their perspectives on the world. So they want to have like a very diverse group of students that have all sorts of different interests, all sorts of different things that they want to do from different backgrounds. And therefore they might all go do different things, right? So even a school like Princeton or UPenn, like, is not admitting only students that want to go into finance, right? There's a population of that, but they want students that are going to go into a lot of different things. So one example of this that I always give is like at Harvard. So at Harvard, and the only reason I use this example is because they had to actually give the data away to there was like some court cases, so they actually had to publicly release data on their admissions process. And one of the things that's really interesting is students that want to go into medicine have a much lower acceptance rate at Harvard, roughly a third of the acceptance rate as students that want to become educators. Okay, and Harvard does not care theoretically about the major you want to go to. They're just accepting students into Harvard. They're not accepting them into specific majors, but they are looking at your career ambitions to determine whether or not you like, because they want people that are going to go into all sorts of different careers. Otherwise, you might just get only students that are going to go into medicine, and they want to have a positive impact on every part of the world, right? This really does matter. That doesn't mean like go forth and like say you want to be a teacher when you don't want to be a teacher. It's kind of obvious within your application that maybe you don't. Like, I'm not saying go lie on your applications, but what I'm saying is like, this does matter a lot, right? Different students that want to go do different things, have different backgrounds, different ways of thinking about the world. They're trying to bring all of that together. Here, so these are the 5 traits that colleges look for in applicants. As we're looking through essays, we are all going to try to identify these traits in what we are reading, okay? And where we can't find the traits, that's where we try to think of questions or lines of questioning, or should this topic be completely changed? Is there ways that they can add to this, what they have written so far, that could start displaying one or more of these traits? A single essay does not need to cover all 5 of these traits. It needs to cover your 2 or 3 biggest strengths. Across all essays in an application, you might cover all 5 of these traits, but you still want to hone in on your 2 or 3 biggest strengths, because what colleges are looking for is not students that are okay at all 5 of these. They want students that are exceptional at least a couple of these. Okay.
So Brad, there's a question about, given the pandemic, with the past, 2 school years, what if a student really didn't get a chance to, do all the things they wanted to do that could highlight these 5 traits? Or maybe they're not thinking about it well enough that even in the pandemic, they could have, done some of these things in a different way, compared to when school was, live or in person.
So I think there's a couple of things. Number one is we find that most students that are saying that are just not thinking about thinking about themselves in the right way. Okay. So they obviously did something during the pandemic. Now, some kids just sat around and played video games. Okay. That's probably not that one is probably not going to win, but there's other students that were engaging with their friends, positively contributing to other people in some sort of way. I've seen some really good essays on our soccer team couldn't do anything during the pandemic, so I made sure that we were still practicing, and we were having house party events, on the house party app. Apparently there's one called that. All these sorts of things that actually end up being really interesting, compelling content and show initiative and leadership. It just so happens to be that it's not in some formal activity at school. And we often find that with intellectual curiosity, that's usually not associated with something that's within a school environment. A lot of that's what students are doing kind of on their own. So number one is we often find that students that say that, it's actually not true. They just didn't they haven't talked or engaged with people about what are the things that you were doing? How are you spending your time? And then you can actually start identifying these things that can be really compelling content in essays. So that's number one. Number two is at this point, you have to think about the other students that you're competing with, right? And I don't want to be a downer too much or anything, but this is also for the underclassmen or the juniors that are on this call, is that you're competing with people that have been through the pandemic, right? And also have had these things. And many students have, figured out other stuff to do, right? That may have been different than they would have done otherwise, but they're still taking the initiative to do things. So I would say on whole, yes, many students have definitely in totality done less than they would have been able to do otherwise, right? But there are some students that have figured out where was there a path that they were able to still do compelling things, whether or not it was just related to self-learning on their own, right? Whether or not that was still engaging with other students or other people in some way. There were things that could be, that we are seeing that students have done. They're just different than things that students have done in the past, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way we're seeing it. And we see the same thing with students that are asking about, well, how do I write? I had worse grades as a result of this because I didn't do well with virtual learning, right? And to some degree, it's well, yeah, the schools are going to definitely consider that, but also there was a lot of students that had virtual learning, so they're comparing you against other students as well.
So Brad, there's another question here, which is an interesting one. Devaney is asking, why do different essay coaches have different rules? So some, will say, don't ever talk about a childhood experience. Or they'll say, don't mention mental health. But yet another, essay coach might say, just be yourself. So it feels like, and maybe that's just, the coaches out there, but you guys are kind of have a different framework to work within. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah. So the general gist of it is, number one is we're writing educators. Number two is we actually have a deep understanding of what does the audience actually really care about. So we focus on that. And so the issue is that whenever somebody puts a rule out, that's not very useful, Okay. And the reason for that is like, guess what? You should never write about a childhood experience. Well, for some students, maybe you should need to mention that in your essay. Like it shouldn't be your whole essay, but what you're doing is by putting certain rules or certain things forward, all of a sudden you are like creating boundaries around students that they feel they can't do something when in reality for that specific student, they should. Okay. So our rules are basically just a general framework. Like you want to write about things that colleges are actually going to find compelling about your student that they are literally evaluating when they're evaluating the application, right? Whatever you write about, as long as it relates to these traits in some way, shape, or form, it doesn't matter, right? But it just needs to be compelling and relate to these things, some of these things in some way, shape, or form, because this is what they're actually looking for. And so like some people are like, hey, you should never write about athletics. And guess what? Like for the vast majority of athletes, that's probably good advice. Okay. But for the 15 or 20% of athletes that are like, you know, really building their own skills, spending hours and hours outside of practice doing that, being super intellectually curious about how they're building their skills or about nutrition or other things like that they're working on, or have certain leadership that they're doing within their sports. Like they can write extremely compelling essays about that. And the same goes with music, right? So these rules of thumb are not like, are oftentimes like, they're okay for maybe sometimes the majority of students, like more than half, but they're not okay for the ones that actually should be writing about that. And so we see a lot of times people say, oh, I shouldn't write about something. It's like, well, actually, that is the most compelling thing about you. So your instinct to potentially write about that, but then decide not to write about it because somebody told you not to is correct. You should have written about it as long as it relates to these. You happen to be one of the 5 or 10% of students that probably should be writing about that, right? And this is where the difficulty lies. This is why I always say there's no such thing as a bad topic for an essay. The key is it has to prove that you're going to be successful in college and beyond by relating to one or more of these 5 traits. Okay. And that's really, really important. And like, I've seen just incredible essays about content that's, you know, related to, mental health in some way. Right. But it just so happens to be that like that story and that path, like has set that student on, like they've figured out so many things about themselves and they're now so much more successful than they would have maybe done otherwise. And they are going to be really clearly successful in school. Like this is like, they're not a risk for that school or not graduating or something like that. And that could be really good to write about. So it's like one of those things where it's not a hard and fast rule. Like I've even seen like situations where like general rule of thumb, like don't write about like boyfriend, girlfriend stuff, like general rule of thumb, but like occasionally you get an essay that's like, hey, actually that was the right choice, right? like a sliver of it, right? So that's why I don't like these like hard and fast rules, right? There's also things where people are like, hey, you have to use a metaphor, an analogy or something like that. And guess what? Like, do you see anything within these 5 traits that signal or like how colleges are evaluating students that like have to do with like how great of a metaphor you were able to use? No, like there's nothing, right? So this is like, there's just these things that, and guess what? Some students do a great job of using a metaphor, but guess what? The vast majority of students shouldn't be using that kind of language or that kind of thing. So this is, not to rail on other essay coaches or anything, but like we have like the best success of anybody that measures success actually out there. Number one, and number two is like, we're really focused on like, what does the audience actually care about, right? And we're trying to instill that in your students. So that way, when they go off to school, they also still have that same mindset with everything they write. Like we very frequently, we have parents telling us that like, my kid has learned more working with your writing coach than they have in all of their years of school about writing.
Well, I was just going to say this idea of kind of understanding, like, like Devony's asking, like, the rules are less important. It's the framework. And actually what's most important is, as you're saying, understanding who the audience is and what they're looking for. And that applies to college essays. It applies to anything that you really,
anything you write or speak or communicate or anything, right? Yeah. Just absolutely anything. And that is, I always say college essays are like usually the first time in a student's life where they write for somebody that's not their teacher. And that's really hard for people. And guess what? Like they're getting advice from people that don't actually understand what the audience is looking for. Right. And honestly, like sometimes when you ask admissions officers or former admissions officers, they're not necessarily able to articulate this in a particularly good way either. Right. It's taken us years to figure out, like, how do we articulate this in a clear and concise way? I know this seems really simple, but like
That's what always happens when you actually able to boil down complex ideas to something simple. It's like, oh yeah, of course that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Like it makes sense. Tell your story that relates to proving success in college and beyond. Oh, that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
But that's not kind of the framework or how people look at it. So a couple of quick things, and then we're going to get to actually looking at some essays, which is always the most fun part of this. So one is I alluded to this, and this is actually based in actual admissions data, that strong essays can improve your admissions chances up to 10x. Okay, and that's because these are students with similar academic profiles. So let's say you're applying to Harvard, 84% of all Harvard applicants are above their academic bar. Another reason why I use Harvard is because they actually had to release the data, but this goes for like all schools. So in other words, the vast majority of applicants at colleges are academically capable. The college believes they're academically capable of succeeding at that college. Okay, so how do they differentiate between those students? Yes, they use some variations in academics, but there's huge swaths of students that basically have the exact same academic profile, and they use essays as a key differentiator, or sometimes interviews, or what they call the personal scores, like a few different components of which essays are generally the most important part. This really matters. So at Harvard between 2014 and 2019, or 2015 and 2019, if you had what's called just like a average personal score, like just like a normal personal score, you'd have a 2.5% admissions chance. And if you had a strong personal score, you had a 25% chance of admission. Okay. What that also means is that only 1 in 5 applicants even had good essays. Okay.
Wow.
This is a critical differentiator. Like it really is. And it all comes down to students not understanding who their audience is, how to actually structure like their thoughts and put that down in a clear, compelling way, and readable way, to be perfectly honest. Okay. All right. The other thing I'm just going to highlight is like, when do essays actually matter? Because they don't always actually matter, but generally speaking, essays matter for highly selective institutions. So these are when admissions rates are like 15% or below. This number of these institutions is always increasing now, apparently, because the number of applications to these institutions are just consistently increasing. So that's number one. Number two is selective colleges, which is like a 15 to 50% admission rates, where your academics are like just above their academic bar. So it's not like super strong compared to other applicants at that school. Then essays can be a really important factor for you. People always ask me, how do I know if my academics are way above or the bar or not? And the answer is like really hard to figure that out. like it just is. But generally, because different high schools have different grade point averages, so you can't just go off of like, oh, I have the same grade point average. It's like my grade point average is above the average admitted student. Well, they consider so many other factors, like how many APs you've taken, sometimes the scores on the APs, or like if you've been in an IB program, or like literally what high school you went to and how rigorous the curriculum is there. And all these other things. Like a good rule of thumb is like, if your standardized test score is in like the top quartile of students that were admitted to that school, you're generally in pretty good shape. But still, like it's hard to tell. The other thing where essays do matter is large colleges where you're applying to highly desirable programs. So yes, some schools admit like 20,000 students a year, but guess what? And so it's almost like each college within that school, or each major, has their own allocation of students. So you're basically just applying to that school, right? So at Carnegie Mellon, for example, like their computer science program is like very, very difficult to get into. And if you want to go for like humanities, like it may not be as difficult to get into just from like an admissions rate perspective because of who's applying there. Carnegie Mellon also has an incredible drama program. So it's like extremely hard to get into like that, but it might be easier other places. That's just because they allocate certain numbers of slots at different things. A general rule of thumb is like computer science tends to be more difficult, and STEM. Most, like a lot of different STEM ones tend to be more difficult academically. But as I said, generally speaking, like you do need to look at each institution. Unfortunately, many of the institutions don't publish this data for admit rates by major. Some do, some don't, but you should look it up, Google it for what you're doing. That can help you determine how much essays may matter. And then essays matter less for like selective colleges where your academics are really strong, right, compared to other students. So like Georgia Tech is a good example of this, where you might just have really strong academics and they're like, yeah, really care that much about the essay. Like they'll read it to make sure you're not a bad person, basically. But other than that, you'll probably still be okay. But once again, you have to understand, like, are your academics actually far above like the bar right at that school? And then other large colleges where you're applying in-state or to less competitive programs, it's typically where essays matter a bit less. But as I always say, is like, look, it doesn't take that much time to have a really good essay. What really matters is like you have an understanding of what you need to write about. You have somebody that can help your student through that, or at least like go through that yourself with your student. And then write the essay, revise it a few times. Like this isn't like a process that's like 20 hours for students. Like it's a process that, like, for a Common App essay, they should be in totality spending maybe 5-6 total hours on themselves. Okay. And they can get to a really good essay. All right. Final thing before we get to the essay is prompt.com/road to college. And this week only, we have like $100 off on our one-on-one coaching that we do. We have thousands and thousands of students that we work with for that, including hundreds of Road to College students as well. We're starting to get back some awesome admissions results. I think like WashU came out today. I haven't heard much there, or I think Rice did as well. I know we have like a bunch of kids into like Wake Forest already, and I forget what other schools, but a lot of scholarships, a lot of cool stuff, like just hearing about all the time. So, but this is a fun time of year for us because we get to get all the successes. But we are working, and we work through the holidays. So one of our busiest weeks of the year is the week between Christmas and New Year's. Try not to wait that long, but
I was going to say it might be Brad's busiest week, but don't make it your busiest week.
Yeah, don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to yourself. I try not to do that to myself. My New Year's Eve is always a little has a lot to do with essays. So is what it is. So let's go ahead and review some essays.
So Brad, one more thing before you start to do essays, maybe just, can you talk about, because there's always this concept or idea about how long do the admissions people really even take to read the essays?
Yeah, so the stat is that the average application, an admissions officer looks at the entirety of the application for 8 minutes on average. Okay, now that's the average, right? Some applications get more time than that. Usually those are the ones that they're kind of on the fence on. Okay, so where they actually like need to dig in deep on certain essays, right, and really try to understand the student and therefore like compare them, right? And sometimes they're like picking up that application multiple times, right? So they kind of put it in like a maybe pile, then they like revisit it, or other admissions officers revisit, etc. Sometimes it takes way less time because they're like, hey, this is an obvious admit, or it's like an obvious denial, right? But the key point here is like it's not much time, right? So if they have 8 minutes for the entirety of the application, they're taking a look at school you're applying, your high school profile that they get, because they're trying to understand like your high school and how your student is doing relative to other students within that high school. They are looking at all the academics side of this, all demographics, like all that sort of information, and then they're looking at the activities list, the essay, the Common App essay if they have that, all of the supplemental essays, recommendation, like literally everything, right, in an 8-minute window. So they're reading your Common App essay in like 1 to 2 minutes. Like that's the way to kind of think about it. Supplements, similar, right? So it's like very quick. And the key point here, and as we read through these essays today, is you can't lose your reader too quickly. Like you don't want your reader to think like, how is this relevant? Like once they're there, they're like, I don't know what the student is trying to tell me. How is this relevant for me understanding the student? Once they'll keep reading, but all of a sudden you've kind of lost their mind. They're like, this is probably a no, right? And you don't want to, it's what I call the reject mindset versus the accept mindset. You want to keep them in that accept mindset. You want to have like a pretty clear understanding of where the essay is heading. And most essays that I read, especially many first drafts, like the student might think that they're communicating their thoughts well, but they're not. And you'll see that here today where you're like, I don't know what's going on here, right? But that's the thing, right? Is like you have to think about, like I always say, writing is about clarity. And I have this chart that I'm not going to bring up here, but really what writing is, and your entire goal with what you write, is to reduce the probability that your audience misunderstands what you're trying to say. Like that's your goal, right, is to reduce potential for misunderstanding. And the issue is that many students are on like the high end of that, where it's like there's a high probability that your reader is going to misunderstand what they're saying, or your reader is going to have to like think really deeply and try to make connections across the document yourself. And you don't want to put yourself in that place because they don't have enough time to actually figure that out. It's really hard. Okay.
So one quick
yeah, as I pull this up, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and this is somebody who just wanted to know a little bit more about the one-on-one coaching. Like, how many times does that really mean? Like, you know, how much time would somebody be working with a coach for that one-on-one?
Yeah, so it's unlimited, but most students, like obviously, like we have a pretty good idea of like how much students actually use, right? And so the typical student is usually doing 1 to 2 like video coaching calls, basically before, let's say, just for a Common App essay. They like plan kind of their content for their application, and a lot of times they get to planning their outline for their essay first, or they might have an essay they're submitting first to us, and then we're kind of still going through that process, figuring out what to write about, make modifications to that essay. So usually that's either 1 or 2 calls we do that over, and then you're doing 3 or 4 rounds of feedback with your writing coach. When you're starting to get into supplements, we do like calls for like, okay, we're going to talk about the supplements for all the supplements for this particular school, like your top choice school. Then you write all your supplements and you get feedback on those as well. And you implement the feedback. Occasionally we do a call while you're implementing the feedback, like if that's going to be more efficient or more helpful. So that sometimes happens. It's like a fairly flexible program. And then we like help your student also like draw connections between essays. So it's like, hey, this essay you can use like part of it for this other essay, right? For other supplements. So like typically speaking, like if you work with us on all of your schools, you are generally get about 40 to 50 hours of one-on-one coaching time. For like, if you're applying to like the most essay intensive school, so you're writing like 40, 50 plus essays in some cases, like you're going to using like 40 to 50 hours of writing coach time. And so like, we don't skimp on this basically. Like we're not trying to make it so you're not using these, like we're trying to be all like really efficient with this and get your student to a really good outcome very quickly, right? That's kind of the goal here. All right, let me go ahead. I think I got all the windows selected for all of these different essays. Let's see what comes up first. All right, this is the first one today. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. As we read through this together, I'm gonna read it out loud, all right? Then what you are going, and by the way, I'm just randomly selecting some. There's a bunch of them. I actually have a bunch up on my screen, but whatever ones I click on is the ones that, like this one was randomly the first one that came up, right? So what we're going to read for is number 1, what did I learn about the students? And in particular, how does that relate to the 5 traits? So I want you all, like as I'm going or after I finish, into the chat, drop, what did I actually learn about the student? How does that relate to the 5 traits? That's number 1. Number 2 is, what didn't I learn about the student that I wanted to learn? So oftentimes as I'm reading through, I'm like, oh, there's a question that comes into my mind, and that question just goes completely unanswered, right? So we want to understand that. And then the third is like, how about the structure? Is the structure like, is it clear, readable? Like, how can I restructure the essay to make it more compelling, right? So that's the general gist of it. All right, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and read this out loud, and you all are going to drop into the chat as we go. Then we're going to get some of your comments, go through them, and then I'm going to talk about like what I think about this.
And then one last thing, and honestly, we do not know, or I didn't tell Brad who submitted this. Completely up to you. If you were here and you want to ask questions, and that's fine. If you don't,
yeah, you can come live and actually have a chat with me. Like some people want to do that, other people don't. Like that's fine, right? Even if your students here, we can do that. All right. Let me take a drink before I read through the whole thing. All right. So before I could even walk, my head was dunked in water as a way to release me of my past sins and overcome future ones. As soon as I could listen to directions, I was placed into Sunday school to learn cherry-picked Bible stories to show how amazing God was. I was indoctrinated into believing that the Christian God was the true God, and I needed to live up to the standards he created for me. At school, I would recite the pledge that reads, "One nation under God," without a second thought to what that meant to me or the students who believed in different, many, or no God at all. At home, if I swore, I would have to apologize to God in order to be in his good graces once more. I was wired to believe that I must follow the 10 Commandments to be invited into this unknown heaven. Right? Through most of the following years, I held on to those beliefs and even tried to convince others to believe the same. My friend's family had not been as involved in the church as mine was, so he grew up as an atheist. He was not an expert on atheism, nor did he know why he did not believe in the Christian God. I took this as a perfect opportunity to try to persuade him to become a fellow believer. This went on for months, and even every conversation we had regarding the topic ended with him saying some form of, "I am a man of science." This was not the end of my journey as a Christian, but it was the beginning of the end. I took this failed conversion as a sign I was not educated enough on the topic, so I went beyond the church readings and started studying on my own. At this point, I instead began to learn about the discrepancies, mistranslations, and contradictions in the Bible. At first, I ignored them because I did not want to believe that there was a possibility that what I believed my entire life is wrong. However, as soon as I learned the real history of the religion, from the Spanish Inquisition to the Stonewall riots, I realized that Christianity was not the all-inclusive judgment-free religion that my teachers and I claimed it to be. Instead, most of the time, most forms of Christianity were used as a way to justify killing and enslaving people. The white man's burden was not something I learned about until freshman year in an AP course. Throughout the course of history, Christianity was the pillar upon which white supremacy, murder, injustice, and so much more evil stood. I felt guilty that I was even a part of the evil Christianity, but how could I? I was only told the good while the rest of the Bible stories were omitted. Only when I explored my religion on my own did I realize how evil the religion can be. Now I believe that should not be the case, and I am currently registered a Satanist under the Satanic Temple because one of their 7 fundamental tenets resonates with me heavily. One's body is violable, subject to one's own will alone. To me, this means that no one should force or coerce another into believing or doing anything. In the future, as a politician, I will continue to deconstruct the pillar of evil by not hiding or changing the truth of history from young minds. If non-white children are old enough to experience racism, then white children are old enough to learn critical race theory and the true past, not to make them feel guilty, but to give each child all information to make their own decisions. The foundation of America was freedom, and I will ensure that is a right for all. All right. So drop into the chat. What did you learn about the student? Maybe how does this relate to 5 traits in some way, shape, or form? What didn't I learn about the student that I wanted to learn? Like, how did you feel about the structure? Like, how did you think this essay was, for example, heading at the beginning of reading this essay? I'll walk through my mindset in just a second as I was going through this. But go ahead and drop that into the chat. Debbie and I love to see the comments, and I'm sorry if all of you thought that that were attending today thought that you could just sit back idly and not have to put forth mental energy this evening, but that is not the case.
And Brad, just reiterate the 5 traits. I'll put it in the chat so that people can.
Okay, you'll put it in the chat. Cool. I was just about to add it to the chat, but it's drive, intellectual curiosity, initiative, contribution, and diversity of experiences. Yes, Alex, I was not expecting that. Was not expecting that. And if this is your essay and you want to come up and chat, that's perfectly fine too, but you don't have to.
Okay, sorry, you went to drive, intellectual curiosity, community.
No, it's initiative, contribution, and diversity of experiences.
Okay.
Cool. Well, folks are not inputting it here, but feel free as we go through this. I'm just going to start talking about kind of like my general thoughts as I was going through the essay. All right. So at the beginning of the essay, and this is where things are really important. And it's kind of
someone did say they thought intellectual curiosity was present. I kind of agree.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Like, and you also have to think about like your audience and like what your audience cares about, right? So there's components of this, right? And there's some diversity of experiences that are in here potentially as well, diversity of thought, right? Within here as well. At the same time, like you kind of look at this and like certain people, like one of the things that always concerns me a little bit is, and I'll see this as we go through this, is like if you're on the more philosophical bent side of things, if you're saying stuff or making points that may contradict the belief system of a person that may be reading this, that is your audience, that could end up being a negative for you in some way, shape, or form. Okay. Just putting it out there. And so like, sometimes it's like really about like, how can we, make sure that some stuff gets positioned in a way that it's not going to be antithetical to what somebody else's belief system or what they may care about. So as I was
Brett,
going,
just most people said they agreed intellectual curiosity and diversity of experience.
yeah, so it's there, right? So a couple of things, right? So one is, and this is really important. So I'm reading through this, and at the end of the first paragraph, or really the first couple of sentences, what am I understanding about the student, and where do I think this essay is heading, right? So I think that it is heading, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think that it is heading to the point where they are going to say that they don't believe in Christianity anymore. Okay, I think that. But then what's weird is I get to the next paragraph, and they're trying to convert other people, essentially, right? And I'm like, am I correct in my assessment that this is where the essay is heading, or am I not? Right? It's not 100% clear, right? And what you want is for your reader to have a very good understanding of where is your essay likely heading, okay? And it's okay to have surprising information, but to be completely thrown for a loop sometimes is a little like, I'm towards the end of the essay, I'm kind of like, I don't know about this. And I'm like, oh, this is all of a sudden way more interesting, right? And when you get to that point, you're like, do I need to go back and reread stuff so I now have this new context and can reread the rest of the information? And guess what? Like, your reader, like the admissions officer, doesn't have time necessarily to do that, and we'll see that as we go through here. But this is interesting, right? And it's like, okay, so now I'm going to study this on my own, and that like is helpful. Now, what's less helpful for me as I'm going through this is where I'm seeing like, okay, like they have discrepancies, contradictions, etc. in the Bible. Maybe some examples of that, right? Ignored them, right? Then the Spanish Inquisition and the Stonewall riots, like, okay, the real history of religion, okay, but what's not clear to me, so like I'm thinking like with my critical thinking hat on, like what am I thinking, like where's the student trying to get to, right? What is the point that they're trying to make? And it's unclear, right? Because you could be making the point, like I'm trying to decide right now, are they making the point that Christianity itself as a religion is bad because they use Christianity to cause harm, right, to others, but that is kind of post the whole biblical time, if you will, right, of the New Testament. So like, what is the point that they're trying to make here, right? So I'm thinking like, hey, maybe they're going to make the point that, okay, God is, and not to get all philosophical here or anything, but maybe they're trying to make the point that God is like still there, right? But what religions have done is bad, right? And the opposite of the teachings, right? That's a point that I think maybe they're trying to make, but that's not actually where it gets to, right? So I'm unclear, right? And this makes it really, really hard for me as a reader to actually understand where it's going, because I'm constantly trying to guess where this essay is going, right? I'm constantly trying to understand the student better by understanding like where are their mindset heading? Like, where is this heading, right? And I think there was, all of a sudden, like, now we're getting into like white man's burden and critical race theory and stuff like that. I was not expecting that. Okay. And like, that's okay to have the content here, but like all of a sudden, like, I'm like, I don't know where this is going. Okay. And then I get into like the Satanic Temple, which is like not expecting that. Okay. Not to say like this is bad to include or anything. Like, there's clearly logical reasoning behind like why they made this decision and choice. And that's useful and compelling information. It actually shows a lot of thought and intellectual curiosity and understanding of oneself, right, to include something like this, right? That is actually really helpful. It actually said a lot within a very small number of words, but it was not expecting it. So all of a sudden I'm towards the end of the essay, I didn't really have a great sense of where the essay is going, the whole essay. Now I have a pretty good sense of it, but now I basically need to go reread the other content to put that into context. Okay. So like in terms of like how I'm thinking about this, like there's some good intellectual curiosity here. There's a lot of content that could probably be cut down or removed to be able to show more of the like self-learning process and specific things that they found that were really surprising, basically, as they studied religion and Christianity in a much deeper way and how they thought about it. There's a little bit of that information in here, but I feel like it could be expounded upon a good amount more, right? And then like, how does that actually tie into like now how they kind of view the world, right? And you know, some of these other things that could be much better tied together logically from a coherence perspective. And you know, maybe there's something that's related to initiative or drive that they have done or contribution that is like talking to others about this in some sort of way. That is kind of a missing element to this, right? So how are they kind of building their intellectual platform? Are they engaging with others kind of around this in a meaningful way, right? That could start adding in more traits or more things, or help me better understand how you think about the world from this, right? And so like those are kind of like the couple of really big missing pieces of content. In terms of how I think about restructuring this essay, I would try to take forward, like it's what I call like guiding sentences, right? So the beginning of this, like what is like the more interesting thing, right? So like I could have like a start with like a very interesting juxtaposition, right? So one thing that I could do, and I'm not looking at it in the comments, and I'm going to look at the comments in just a second, but one thing that I could do is say, I used to believe in God, right? In Christian, I was a Christian, believed in God. Now I am a, you know, of the member of the satanic order, right? Immediately within the first two sentences of the essay, I'm like, I'm going on a journey, right? Like I am going from this to this, right? And like, that's the journey that this essay is about, right? And if I knew that from the beginning of the essay, like within the first couple of sentences, I would be in this position where like, oh, this is really interesting, right? I'm now going to learn kind of like, how did they go along that? How do they decide that? Like, how is that maybe like transform and how they view the world, right? And so that's really interesting, you know, from the beginning, like if I was to think about like how I'm starting that, whereas a lot of this stuff may not be necessary.
So what's interesting?
Not bad, but like it's like it's some of it may not be necessary. Go ahead, Debbie.
No, I was gonna say you could, you know, do a quick read and kind of walk around and say, oh well, the paper really wasn't a good topic, you know, to use. But it's not so much that. It's actually, it could be an okay topic. It's just how the story was presented and what they wanted to highlight.
Yeah, and the part of this is that if I'm the reader, like I start taking things in like not great ways. Like when I get to like some of the more preachier parts of this, where it's like, okay, you're 18 or 17. You know, let's not get philosophical and preachy in the essays, okay? It's helpful for me to understand like your worldview and how you think about things, right? And that, hey, actually, like it's okay. Like I believe that like critical, you know, we need to be learning these different topics or these different things, right? That is something. And then like I like the tie in with like the political office, by the way, later. I think that's helpful, right? I love kind of being able to picture this person in their future, like after they graduate, right? And picture them also on my campus, right? I love that. But what we have to be really careful of is the exact language that we use. So that way it doesn't come across as like being preachy or philosophical. We're like kind of a net, you know, basically telling somebody that they're wrong, right? That's your audience, right? What you want your audience to do is just understand you better and how you think about the world and how you have come to this realization. And like, how does that affect what you're going to do in the future, right? Which the political office part can be a really interesting, strong tie-in because that does tie to this, like, this nobody should force or coerce. Like, this is good. Like, I would, like, that is really good, useful content. And that could even come earlier in the essay in some ways, right? Or it can be at the end. There's like a lot of choices to be made here. like like this gets to like what I talked about before. There's no such thing as a bad topic for an essay. Like, to be honest, like this is probably not the topic that I would generally recommend choosing, but this student has clearly written about this for a reason, right? This is something that they find is deeply important to themselves, especially this part here and how that relates to what they want to be a politician in the future. Like, it's very clear they want to write this essay and on this topic, but what it needs to be done is presented in a way that's not going to come across negatively, right, or paint them in a negative light, but also help me understand as a reader where this essay is heading basically from the beginning, right? That I think is really important, because so many times I read essays and I'm like, I don't know if this is a good topic or not, and I think that from the beginning of the essay, and then by the end I'm like, actually this probably was a good topic to write about, but they did it in the wrong way.
So, Brad, do we have time? Can we go to one more?
Yeah, we can do one more.
Okay.
Let me see. What do we got here? All right, we'll do this one. Just have like although the line spacing is just FYI, like I don't think you get necessarily a choice in the Common App necessarily, but like if you do, put a little bit of space.
At least 1.5, yeah.
Yeah, 1.5, 1.2,
yeah,
at least. The thing is, like, when I look at this paper, when I just physically look at this, I don't want to read it. Okay. Put a space between paragraphs. Like, that's a good idea too. Like a full space. It's like, it's one of the things, is like one of my strong like things is like, if I look at a paper and I don't want to read it, that's not great. But we'll get here. So, performing Olivia, front stage and backstage. Under the shining stage lights, I clutch my nunchucks, a deep scowl embedded on my face as I turn to begin my performance. Any thoughts of the comfort of my bed and the books carelessly strewn across it leave my mind, as now my sole focus is putting on a clean routine. The sudden switch in character that occurs once I step into the public sphere reminds me of sociologist Irving Goffman's dramaturgical model of identity, where individuals perform their identities like actors in a play. Front stage is how we act when we're surrounded by others, and backstage is the role we subconsciously take when the curtains are drawn and we're left alone. I'm constantly returning to Goffman's model to understand myself, to reconcile my seemingly unrelated or conflicting identities. I often find myself in packed rooms with spectators crowding around a competition ring and in front of a stage. On the stage, I hesitantly step into the role of a fierce performer. I must maintain a level of intensity and power that is otherwise completely foreign to me. Inherently shy and soft-spoken, I vehemently reject the idea of kyakes when I first started karate competitions, and still struggle with the necessity of yelling. But in the world of elite karate, the performing doesn't stop after my final bow to the judges. I'm constantly being watched at the dojo, at tricking, a combination of karate, tumbling, and breakdancing gatherings, or even at the airport while wearing my Team USA gear. Whether I'm warming up at the World Championships in Italy alongside athletes from around the world, or filming a tricking tutorial alone in my garage, I end up being judged. This public evaluation made me a role model. I never expected strangers to approach me telling me how excited their child is to watch me perform, nor to receive requests for advice, critiques of routines, or to judge competitions. I still don't feel entirely deserving of this attention, but I learned to play the part and grew to love teaching, cheering on my fellow competitors, and being outspoken about my experience as a girl in a male-dominated sport. However, I'm most relaxed backstage, visiting many worlds, from Joan Didion's California to Hogwarts. Sometimes my attempts to mindlessly indulge in plot rapidly evolve into a much deeper exploration of these worlds, whether I'm judging my favorite villains by Machiavelli's standard or tracking common motifs in the dark academy genre. This time alone gives me the freedom to have lively debates with myself and follow my thoughts wherever they go. As a homeschooler, this eclectic and spontaneous exploration of ideas mirrors my learning style. In the span of a few hours, I get to discuss each sheet in my virtual homeroom, annotate studies of metabolic targets for autoimmune disease treatments, and solve Gaussian elimination problems. I spend extra time doing a flame test on a compound I synthesized, or take a closer look at the frog's intestines. After all, the lab is my dining room, and I don't have to worry about making it to my next class. Spending time alone inevitably leads to my thoughts shifting from analyzing the world around me to analyzing my place in the world. I discovered that and adopt new backstage identities like the outsider. I'm half Bulgarian and can recognize when a Slavic name is mispronounced, yet the syllables feel equally foreign on my tongue. And even as an undeniably female tricker, I'm often told that I don't trick like a girl, yet I don't feel part of the boy trickers community either. In embracing Goffman, I've stopped picking through the characteristics of my various roles in an attempt to define my singular authentic self. Instead, I accept all of my various identities, my front stage and backstage performances as equally important, including those I have yet to discover.
Wow, there's a lot packed in there.
Yep. All right. So once again, here's what we're going to do, right? So drop in. What did you learn about the student? How does that relate to the 5 traits? What did you find particularly compelling? Like, what did you learn about them, right? And this essay, what didn't you learn that you wanted to learn? Like, how could this be restructured? I have tons of thoughts on this essay. So much just interesting things going on here, which I love, like these types of students, like these kind of that are just like clearly super self-motivated, right? It's awesome stuff. And those students often have like, they're the most fun for like, you know, like a lot of our coaches love working with students that like have this like drive and like super intellectually curious about like all sorts of different things. And like so much of it is like, how do you even present that totality of information?
Right.
There's just so much going on.
Somebody's asking, are these essays for the Common App or a different application? For me, the website says essays need to be maximum to 650 words, but the last 2 seem much longer than that. No, these are for the Common App. We didn't
These
do
are
the
just
word
about,
count.
these are probably just about 650 words, just having read them. Usually when we look at drafts, like we're like, just write as long as you want, right? Because it's easier to reduce content than to add content. And by the way, pretty much any first draft of any of these essays I see, like I can cut word count by 40% like that, basically. And our coaches can't too, right? Like this is like, it's so much about like streamlining of thoughts and like, how do you condense those so you can fit in more content that's compelling. That's really, really important. Okay.
So somebody felt that this essay was full of intellectual curiosity, drive, diversity, almost a bit overwhelming, though, in all the topics addressed. That's a little bit the way I felt. In fact, the next comment said the homeschooling experience was compelling. I don't know. I must have missed that. I don't even remember where that was about the homeschooling.
Yeah, it's in here. I'm a big fan, but keep going. Okay, what other things?
Any other comments?
All right, let's go ahead and talk to this for a little bit.
Actually, the thing that stuck in my head was this one line about being a part of Team USA. I'm like, oh my God, like that's more than just like a half a sentence.
Yeah, you would think, but at the same time, like the person reading the application probably knows that already, right before they pick this up. So that's not the end of the world, but like, yes, for us, like, what? Right? Okay, so we have, you know, I think there's a things. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use kind of a strategy of like, what are the, so something that I often do is like, I actually have like what sometimes do is like for essays like this, we'll actually have the student go through and highlight the stuff that actually is the most compelling content in the entire essay. Okay. Which is a pretty good strategy. So here, like things that like really jumped out at me, you know, the inherently shy and soft-spoken, you know, piece of this is interesting, right? Because it like is a juxtaposition against what they're talking about. The things that really jumped out at me are this this piece around like, okay, I'm in this world of elite karate, and the performing doesn't, you know, change basically after their final bow to the judges. That was really compelling to me because now I'm like getting into, oh, like immediately that's a signal to me that they are like probably doing things that are kind of contributing to the community or contributing to others in some way. So being constantly watched, this tricking thing, which I still like, that word kept getting used and I just didn't mentally quite get what it was. Like I got it sort of as I was reading this, but then to have to remember that the rest of the essay is like, was honestly just mentally difficult for me to do. You know, the Team USA gear part of this, World Championships in Italy, part of this really jumped out at me, filming a tricking tutorial. And I wanted to know so much more about this, to be honest. Like, what do you do around that? Like, how many views on those videos do you have, etc.? Like, how frequently is that done? Because it just shows so much like drive, initiative, and intellectual curiosity, like giving back to others. Like, there's so much that can be done there and said in a very short period of space. And like, I didn't get much there. That was something that really jumped out at me as I was going through this. And like, this part was great. Like, strangers coming up to me to watch me, you know, perform or request advice, right? Or to judge competitions, like these things, right? And this self-reflection of didn't feel entirely deserving too is fine, right? And I like this other part here, right? About, you know, kind of the teaching and that sort of thing, but I would love to learn a little bit more, like, what are you doing? Like, how are you doing that, etc. Then this part here, the homeschool part I thought was pretty interesting, just like in terms of like self-exploration of interests. I would have liked to have, you know, I love the eclectic nature of interests, but I would also love to just know, like, is there certain things that maybe you were like drawn to more than others that you find yourself spending a lot more time kind of exploring, you know, intellectually kind of on your own. You know, one of the things that also jumped out at me was like, okay, you're doing this alone. Is there other people that you're engaging with, other homeschoolers, other just like learning communities, or other people that you find that you're also like either like learning together or you're having discussion or that sort of thing? So it feels a little bit less on your own. You know, while that's helpful and like you want to be like clear on the self-learning component of this, and you're already talking a lot about like other team-oriented or contributing things, so that's okay. But if it does exist, or there's probably a line or two that could be pretty compelling that could be added there. And, you know, then, so those are the things that like really, really jumped out at me. Okay. And then this other part, like here, like, but what do you mean by this? Like, I don't trick like a girl, but I don't feel part of the boys tricker community. Right. Once again, it's like, I still like my mental model of like, I still didn't really quite have a deep understanding of what tricking was probably at this point. But I was like, okay, I kind of get it, sort of. But like, what does that even mean? Right. Like, how do you think about that? Like, do you have like your own unique style? Right. Like, is it, you know, and then is that why people are kind of following you? Right. And like, how does that tie in with other stuff? So, you know, overall, I think there's like just a big open question here, right? Which is there's so much compelling content here, and yet I don't realize how compelling this essay is going to be, or how much compelling content there is, until like I get pretty far down in the essay, which means that there's like a lot of stuff's going on here. Like, I literally thought that at the beginning, like under Shining Stage Lights, oh, this is going to be about drama. Then I'm like, nunchucks. I'm like, something else.
Right.
But I'm like, I have no idea. Like, mention karate, maybe, maybe towards the beginning. I just like, I'm kind of clueless, right? As a reader, and so many people are trying to use, and it's not that I'm saying like this is bad to do, but you're trying to use basically like a you know, these like metaphors, right? Or like these kind of trying to make this like more creative sometimes than maybe it needs to be. And I'm not saying don't do that. What I'm saying is that the way that this has been done has signaled to me that I really don't have a great understanding of where this essay is heading. But like, some stuff is like actors again. So am I an actor? Are we talking about drama? Like, what are we talking about here?
Actually, Marie gave an interesting suggestion. She thought that the essay could be themed around the idea of tricking or trickery.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it could. Like, there's like a big question, which is like, do we include, like, does this essay need to include both the homeschool components and the karate, like YouTube sensation, you know, all of that sort of stuff together? If so, I don't know if like tricking could be the overall theme of the essay due to that component. But like, it really depends on where you're applying, right? So if you're applying to an institution where other essays or supplemental essays or additional information can really like bring forward a lot more information on homeschooling, you may want to pull that out here and then really focus on this theme that could be around like, you know, tricking and like karate and like all of that sort of stuff, and like the YouTube nature of this, and like kind of being recognized and, you know, kind of being like a role model. Like there could be a lot there that can be really compelling, because there's so much content that's not being covered that probably should be being covered in both that category and in the homeschooling category. But there's also a lot of wording in here that may not be needed, right? And so a lot of that goes to the you know, these literary devices that we're trying to, and attempting to use, that is actually in some ways taking away from the writing rather than adding to it, right? And I'm not saying like don't use front stage versus backstage, because it does help me kind of understand your mental mindset a little bit, but it might need to be used in a different way and explained in a different way towards the beginning of the essay in order for me to truly understand what does that really mean, because I still don't quite get how the backstage piece is like fitting, you know, I see that fitting into California and Hogwarts. I'm like, yeah, I don't really care that much about that, to be perfectly honest, right? A lot of people are in those worlds, but like, are you creating them? Are you like digging in there? And then the homeschooler stuff is more compelling than that, right? Some of the Bulgarian stuff, like I'm less necessary, right? So the key is like, you don't need to include everything in this. Like what we really need to focus on is like your big time strengths, like the stuff that you really want to hit home and like show that you have these like traits and like leaps and bounds, right? Just a little bit of drive is nice, but like a lot of drive is a lot better. And you can add a lot more stuff related to that or contribution to the community. Like there's missing opportunities here in like a number of different places and positions. And I know that people would generally say, well, that's because we're on a word limit, but there's a lot of wording in here that may not be needed. That's less important than the other wording, right? And that I think is the important part here. Like, and I'm not saying this is a bad essay. This essay is far better than the vast majority of other drafts, like early drafts that I read. But there's just a lot of opportunities that we're leaving on the, you know, on the table that could make this just a significantly amount more compelling.
So this is minor, but it actually comes up a lot. This idea of like a title.
You don't need it.
Yeah.
You don't need it. To some degree, like when a title is added, I almost view it as the purpose of the essay is not clear enough. Okay, so we're like trying to like distill it down into a few words, essentially. Title is completely unnecessary. The vast majority of essays I read don't have a title, and that some students really feel compelled to put a title there, right? And sometimes that can provide a hint, right? Or like that guiding mentally of what this essay is about. But for me, performing Olivia front stage and backstage doesn't give me a clear sense of where this is going. It actually, as it's mentioned, sorry, that's an alarm for me to move my elf on the shelf. But I don't really, it doesn't help me. Like I literally get the sense from reading that title, this is going to be an essay about drama.
I thought so too. Exactly.
Yeah. I thought so too. And from the first shining stage lights, and like it was hard for me to mentally get into a different place.
To shift. I had to think hard about what
I didn't truly get an understanding of what was going on.
Yeah.
Until it was like in the elite world of karate. I was like, you know, first started karate. I was like, oh, fuck. Oh, that's what's going on here. Right. And that made it. And then like the mention of like the Team USA gear, it's like, oh, like all of a sudden, like I start seeing it's like, this is extremely compelling. But from the beginning of the essay, I was kind of like, I don't know where this essay is quite heading. I think this front, like it's going to be about how this person is like one person in this place, and a different person in this other place, which it kind of is about. But the literary devices piece is just like, generally speaking, a lot of people feel like they get advice to use these literary devices and then they get used
too much.
Sometimes they get used really well, and vast majority of the time they get used very poorly.
Yeah.
And this is somewhere in between. But a much more compelling essay probably could have been written without the front stage, backstage at all. There, because you're spending a lot of word count on that. And it doesn't seem like that's core to the overall message that we're trying to drive home here, other than, hey, I think the most clear delineation of this front stage, backstage, like if you were to keep it, if you're keeping that, is, hey, you're on stage for karate and it's like not your natural state of being. And then when you're off stage, you're in your natural state of being, but that's kind of hard because you actually have this like kind of following, right? Like it's kind of hard, right? To even understand that, right? And so I get that part, but some of the other components of this don't fit as cleanly with that, or there's just like too much. Like, it's just hard for me to tie all of these things together under front stage, backstage. If you ask me right now, like, I would be like, okay, where does homeschooling fit? Maybe backstage, but now I have this Bulgarian thing. Now I have this, like, so there's just so many components of this essay that are trying to fit under these themes. And that just makes it very mentally challenging for me as a reader to understand that. Whereas like literally just coming out and saying like, I am, wearing my Team USA gear, like people coming up to me, blah, 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 like, all of a sudden it's like, okay, like I have like a very clear understanding. I'm not saying that's the way to start this, but like I have a very clear understanding like what this is, where is this maybe heading, right? This is about like contributing to a community and like how people are following this, right? The YouTube stuff, like or the video or TikToks or whatever the heck kids are doing these days. That's there as well. Okay.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Brad. I actually am really in awe that how you can read these and then just even in one read through, kind of like dissect it so well. So that's a great true talent, and that's why you have your company Prompt.
It's a weird. I mean, I don't just do this for college essays. I can do this with literally any writing, right? But so much of this is, it's really about like, and kind of writing critical thinking parlance. It's coherence, right? So it's really about kind of tying ideas together in a way that somebody can understand, the points that you are trying to make, and kind of reduce the probability of misunderstanding that we were talking about earlier. Because here, like the probability of misunderstanding is pretty high still.
Yeah.
And mainly because I get to the end of the first one or two paragraphs and I'm left thinking like, I don't know where this is heading. And once you're there, it's real, like to shift people mentally back to, okay, now I need to tie that back to things that I just read that wasn't sure were relevant. That becomes really hard.
Right.
Okay? All right.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Hopefully you got a good sense about how to go and critically look at your own students' essays, or if the students are on here, if you're looking at your essays critically, and just sit back and say, if somebody reads this for the first time, will they really understand what you want to get across? And are you showing to a college that you can be successful there? And think about the 5 traits.
Yeah. And I'll just say final thing, go to prompt.com/road to college. Like it is, most, like we are the highest rated, like not to do like a hard sale or anything, because I do think like it's very possible to work with your students, do a great job on this yourself, right? But it's also getting near the holidays and we're getting near deadlines. Okay. And so we have like all the knowledge and expertise like that literally can, when our writing coaches get trained, they're going through like 20 plus hours of training before they even work with the student, right? So there is a lot that is there, and we only accept 2% of the people that we even apply to be in our network. So my point on this is like there's a lot of stuff that needs to get covered and worked through, and working with a writing coach can just takes a lot of burden off of you. We're also the highest rated on Trustpilot. We're the highest rated essay coaching company out there by a good amount. So I strongly recommend going to prompt.com/road to college. Get started as soon as you can. If you want to contact me if you have any questions, I'm brad@prompt.com. Pretty easy to remember. I might send you off to somebody else, but I'll try to answer any of the questions that you may have directly for me, and we can go from there. All right.
Sounds
Very
good.
good. We will send out who won the free essay tune.
Yes, I was just gonna send that out. Yeah.
Yes, we will send that out. We have to actually, Debbie, we have to like do a random generator on the list.
Yes, that one we truly do random. Yeah, and these were random too.
Yeah, these are random. Like
they
it was
really
literally
are
like,
random.
I had all of them up on my screen. It was literally like whatever was going to show up on my screen when I hit the share button. That was basically what was going to happen. So, all right, very good.
Okay, everybody, good luck. Good luck.
Yeah, and enjoy the rest of the year and the holidays, and hopefully all the rest of college admissions is not too stressful for you all. And for your juniors, don't do this to yourself next year. If you're a junior, make sure you get your essays done like in the summer.
Actually, Brad, I was going to talk to you about it later, but I actually think we should do a session like this for juniors in like February.
Yeah, we definitely can. We definitely can. We'll need to do that. So, yeah. All right. Very good. Have a good one, everybody. Adios.
Good night. Take care. Bye.
Bye.